The ship that came to Earth was beautiful. It floated above the United Nations building like a jewel made of living light. The people of Earth watched with wonder and fear as the first aliens in human history descended from the sky. Ambassador stood at the front of the human welcome party. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. This was the moment humanity had dreamed about for thousands of years. They were not alone in the universe. The aliens called themselves the. They were tall and thin, with skin that glowed soft blue like moonlight on water. Their bones looked delicate, like they were made of glass. When they walked, they moved slowly and carefully, as if the ground itself might hurt them. The leader of the delegation stepped forward. His name was Ambassador, and his large, dark eyes looked around with something close to horror. "Your world," he said through a translation device, "is terrifying." Blinked, this was not what she expected to hear. "I apologize," she said carefully. "Have we done something to offend you?" "No, no," shook his head slowly. "It is not you, it is everything. Your gravity is crushing my bones as we speak. Your atmosphere burns inside my lungs, and the tiny organisms floating in your air, 3 of my assistants are already in medical emergency." Looked at the other. Some of them were indeed struggling to breathe. One had collapsed and was being carried back to the ship. "We have bacteria," explained. "Tiny living things, they are everywhere. Most of them are harmless to us." "Harmless?" made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cry of disbelief. "Your harmless bacteria are eating my colleague alive from the inside." Over the next few weeks, the shared incredible information with humanity. They represented something called the Galactic Concord, an alliance of 47 different species that had existed for over 200,000 years. Thousands of worlds, trillions of beings, and humanity had finally been noticed. But the more they learned about Earth, the more disturbed they became. They classified Earth as a Category 9. This was the highest danger rating possible. The planet was covered in radiation from its own sun. The water was filled with salt and predators. The land was shaken by earthquakes, burned by fires, frozen by ice ages, and struck by rocks from space. Diseases evolved constantly. Predators hunted everywhere. Even the plants were often poisonous. "How did you survive here?" asked one evening. They were sitting in a sealed room that had been specially prepared for with lower gravity and filtered air. "We adapted," said simply. "We learned, we fought, we refused to die." "Your species' history," said quietly, "is a horror story. You have wars in your records that killed millions. You dropped nuclear weapons on your own cities. You drove countless other species to extinction. You almost destroyed yourselves many times." "Yes," agreed, "we did, but we are still here." They were not the only ones watching humanity. In the shadows of the Galactic Concord, older and more powerful species were paying attention. The most powerful of these were the Dominion. They were ancient. They had existed for 3 million years. They thought as one mind, a great hive consciousness that connected billions of bodies across hundreds of worlds. They had conquered 17 other species in their history. Some they had enslaved. Others they had simply erased from existence. When they looked at humanity, they saw weak creatures with soft skin. They saw short. Most humans lived less than 100 years, while individuals could survive for thousands. They saw a species that had only just discovered how to leave their own planet. They saw prey. The High Synod, the 12 queens who ruled the entire Dominion, met to discuss humanity. The decision was quick. "These creatures are primitive," the first queen declared. "Their world has resources we desire. We will integrate them into the Dominion as we have integrated others." "They have warned against this," one advisor mentioned. "They say the humans are more dangerous than they appear." The first queen made a sound of contempt. "They are afraid of sunlight. Their warnings mean nothing. What can soft mammals do against the Dominion? We have conquered civilizations 1 million years older than theirs." The decision was made. humanity's application to join the galactic conquered would be. Instead, Earth would be claimed by the ambassador was called to present humanity's case before the full galactic conquered. She stood in a great hall filled with representatives from dozens of species. Some looked like insects, others looked like living clouds. A few looked almost human but with wrong details, too many eyes, skin the color of metal, limbs that bent in strange directions. Spoke clearly and calmly. "Humanity comes to you in peace," she said. "We offer friendship, trade, and cooperation. We have much to learn from you and perhaps something to teach as well. We have survived on a world that tried to kill us every single day for 4 billion years. We do not seek war. We do not seek conquest. We only wish to take our place among the stars." She paused. Her eyes moved across the assembled aliens until they found the delegation, huge creatures with armored bodies and eyes like black stones. "But let me be clear," continued. Her voice did not change, but something in it became harder. "We have spent our entire existence fighting our world, fighting disease, fighting each other, fighting extinction itself. We know how to survive, and we will defend ourselves against any threat from any source without hesitation and without mercy." The hall was silent. "Do not mistake our desire for friendship as weakness," finished. "We are offering you our hand. We truly hope you take it, because the alternative is something none of us want to see." The representative stood up. He was 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor, with claws that could cut through steel. "Is that a threat, little mammal?" he asked. His voice buzzed like a swarm of angry insects. Looked up at him without fear. "It is a warning," she said, "the only one you will receive." The laughed. It was an ugly sound like bones breaking. 3 months later, the Galactic conquered officially humanity's application for membership. The reason given was insufficient cultural development. The real reason was that they had already begun planning their invasion. In the great hive halls of the 12 queens finalized their strategy. 200 warships would be enough, they decided. Perhaps 300 to be safe. The humans would surrender quickly, as all primitive species did. Their world would be harvested. Their people would be put to work in the mines and factories of the Dominion. They never considered that humans might fight back. They never wondered why a species would evolve to be so violent on their own planet. They ignored every warning. And in doing so, they sealed their own fate. The colony of New Helsinki was humanity's pride. It sat on a world called Frost, 18 light-years from Earth. The planet was cold and harsh, with long winters and short summers. But humans had learned to survive in harsh places long ago. 2 million people called New Helsinki home. Commander stood on the observation deck of the Colonial Defense Station. He was a small man with gray hair and calm eyes. He had fought in 3 wars on Earth before the aliens came. He knew what battle looked like. And right now, battle was coming. 300 ships, his tactical officer reported. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. "They will reach orbit in 6 hours. Nodded slowly. 300 ships against a colony that had maybe 50 defense platforms and a few thousand soldiers. The math was not good. "Send the evacuation order," he said. "Get civilians into the deep bunkers and activate Protocol Omega." The officer's eyes widened. Protocol Omega was the last resort. It meant humanity expected to lose. It meant they would make the enemy pay for every meter of ground in blood. "Sir," she whispered, "that protocol is for extinction-level events." "Look at those ships," said quietly. "Tell me this is not an extinction-level event." She had no answer. 6 hours later, the fleet arrived. There were massive living creatures, grown rather than built. Each one was a weapon, a transport, and a factory all in one. They blocked out the stars like a swarm of locusts. The commander, a war leader named Khan, sent a simple message to the colony below. "Surrender. You will be integrated into the Dominion. Resistance will result in complete destruction. Picked up the communication device. He looked out at the fleet of ships that could burn his world to ash. Then he smiled. This is commander of the new Helsinki Colonial Defense Force. In response to your demand, I offer the following. Go to hell. He cut the transmission. Khan was confused. In his 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever refused surrender when faced with such overwhelming force. Perhaps the human had not understood. He sent the message again. The response was the same, but with more colorful language. They began their assault. The first wave of ground troops landed in drop pods around the colony. 10,000 soldiers, each one a perfect killing machine. They had fought 100 different species. They had never lost a ground campaign. They expected the humans to run. They expected screaming and chaos and easy prey. Instead, they found silence, empty streets, abandoned buildings. Then the explosions began. The colonists had spent 6 hours preparing. They had mined the roads. They had set traps in every building. They had positioned snipers in locations they would never think to check, inside water towers, under bridges, in the sewers below the streets. The first 1,000 died in the first hour. Khan watched the reports come in with growing disbelief. His soldiers were being killed by farmers and factory workers. Humans with simple weapons were destroying warriors who had conquered star systems. Send more troops, he ordered. Overwhelm them with numbers. 20,000 more soldiers landed, then 30,000 more. The humans did not break. They fell back slowly, making the pay for every street, every building, every room. When they ran out of ammunition, they used knives. When they ran out of knives, they used their hands. Sergeant led a squad of 12 defenders in the industrial district. They had been fighting for 2 days without sleep. Half her squad was dead. The other half was wounded. A soldier broke through their barricade. It was 3 times her size, covered in armor, with claws dripping blood. It had just killed 2 of her people. Screamed and jumped on its back. She shoved a grenade into the gap between its armor plates and held on as it tried to throw her off. The explosion killed them both. The soldier next to it transmitted a report back to the command ship. His voice was shaking, something that had never happened in his 1,000 years of life. The humans do not surrender. They do not retreat. When they cannot fight, they kill themselves and take us with them. They are laughing. They are dying and they are laughing. Khan did not understand. No species fought like this. No species threw their lives away so freely. It was illogical, it was wasteful, it was terrifying. After 72 hours, they had lost 40,000 soldiers. 40,000 of the galaxy's most feared warriors, killed by a colony of soft-skinned mammals. The humans had lost more, much more, but they had not stopped fighting. One of Khan's sub-commanders was captured by human forces. Before they could kill him remotely through the hive link, he managed to send one final message. They are not afraid of death. They grew up with death. They are intimate with it in a way we cannot understand. Do not fight them on the ground. Do not let them get close. They will drag you into the darkness with them, and they will be smiling when you both stop breathing. The message reached the High Synod. The 12 queens gathered to discuss this disturbing development. One colony has killed 40,000 of our soldiers, the third queen reported. Our warriors are refusing to land. They say the humans have poison in their souls. Poison in their souls, the first queen repeated with contempt. They are primitives. We simply underestimated their desperation. Send the annihilation fleet to there. Destroy Earth and the colonies will surrender. That fleet has 2,000 ships, an advisor warned. It is the largest force we have ever assembled. Then victory is certain, the first queen declared. These humans are nothing. We have consumed 17 species. We will consume them as well. The order was given. 2,000 began the journey to Earth. The Galactic Concord watched in horror. Ambassador of the requested an emergency session of the Council. "You must stop this," he begged the assembled species. "We warned you about the humans. We told you what it produces. You cannot send a fleet to Earth. You do not understand what will happen." "What will happen?" a representative asked mockingly. "We will burn their world and take their resources, as we have done many times before." Shook his head slowly. His bioluminescent skin flickered with something that looked like grief. "You will wake something," he said quietly. "Humans are survivors. When they are threatened with extinction, they do not surrender. They do not give up. They become something else entirely. Something that has been sleeping inside them since they were hunting animals with sticks and stones." "And what is that?" they asked. Looked at him with ancient, tired eyes. "Exactly what you fear most," he said, "predators." But they did not listen. The fleet continued toward Earth. And on Earth, humanity received word that death was coming. 2,000 ships, enough firepower to crack the planet in half. The United Defense Council met in emergency session. Military leaders from every nation gathered to face the impossible. And then something strange happened. They started to smile. Admiral stood up and looked at her colleagues. "Activate the contingency," she said. "We have prepared for this day our entire history. Let us show the galaxy what happens when you corner a species." Across the planet, hidden facilities came online. Ships that had been built in secret rows from underground hangars. Weapons that had been designed for exactly this moment were loaded and armed. Humanity had been preparing for war since the first human picked up a rock and threw it at an enemy. Now they would show what that really meant. Admiral stood in the command center buried deep beneath the mountains of Japan. Screens surrounded her, showing shipyards and military bases across the planet coming alive. Ships that had been hidden for decades were rising from the ocean, emerging from underground bunkers, and descending from secret stations in orbit. "How many?" her aide asked, staring at the displays with wide eyes. 800 warships, replied. "Not enough to match their numbers, but we do not need to match them, we need to hurt them." The ships were not beautiful. While the Galactic Concord built elegant vessels with smooth lines and graceful curves, human ships looked like they had been designed by people who expected to be hit. They were covered in armor plates, redundant systems, and weapons. So many weapons. "They look angry," the aide said quietly. "They are," confirmed. "We built them to fight things that wanted to kill us. We just did not know what those things would look like yet." Across Earth, preparations continued at a desperate pace. In Geneva, Dr. Samuel briefed military commanders on what they would be fighting and why humans might survive. "They are hive-minded," he explained, pointing to biological diagrams on the screen. "They share thoughts and feelings across their entire species. This makes them coordinated and efficient, but it also makes them vulnerable. Kill a queen and millions of soldiers lose their connection. They become confused, disoriented." "And how do we kill a queen?" a general asked. "That is the difficult part. The queens are protected by their best warriors, surrounded by their strongest ships. Getting to them will cost us dearly." Samuel paused. "But we have advantages they do not understand." He changed the display to show human biology. "Our bodies run on oxygen. To most species in the galaxy, oxygen is a deadly poison. We breathe fire with every breath. Our blood carries iron, a metal that would be toxic to half the conquered species. We consume caffeine, alcohol, and capsaicin for pleasure. These are neurotoxins that would kill in minutes." The commanders were silent. "We can operate without sleep for days. Our wounds heal faster than almost any known species. We can survive the loss of limbs, organs, massive blood loss. We keep fighting long after other species would have died." Samuel looked around the room. "But our greatest weapon is not physical. It is psychological." He showed them historical images. Humans climbing mountains, crossing deserts, surviving in frozen wastelands, fighting wars against impossible odds. "We are adapted to hopelessness," Samuel said quietly. "Our ancestors lived through ice ages that killed most life on Earth. They survived plagues that wiped out half our population. They fought wars that destroyed cities and nations. And through all of it, they never gave up. Because giving up was never an option. Our world did not allow it. They have never faced a species like this," he continued. "They conquer through fear. They win because their enemies surrender. They have no concept of what it means to fight someone who would rather die than submit." In a training facility in Australia, Sargent, or rather, her sister Maria, prepared the ground defense forces, had died on New Helsinki, taking a soldier with her. Maria had received the news 3 days ago. She had cried for 1 hour. Then she had picked up her weapons and returned to training. "They are stronger than us," Maria told her soldiers. "They are bigger than us. They have natural armor, claws, and thousands of years of combat experience." She picked up a combat knife. "But they have never fought humans before. They do not know what we can do. They do not understand that we have been killing things bigger and stronger than us since we were living in caves." She smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Our ancestors hunted mammoths with pointed sticks. They did not chase them. They walked after them, slowly, patiently, for days, until the mammoths collapsed from exhaustion and fear." "We are persistence predators," Maria continued. "We do not need to be faster or stronger. We just need to never stop. We will follow our enemies across continents. We will chase them through hell itself. And when they finally fall, we will be there, still standing, still fighting, still hungry." The soldiers cheered. On a space station orbiting Earth, an observer named watched the human preparations with a mixture of horror and fascination. She had been sent by the Galactic Concord to document the conflict. She had expected to record the destruction of a primitive species. Instead, she was witnessing something unprecedented. "You are not afraid," she said to the human officer assigned to guide her. His name was Lieutenant James Park. "Oh, we are terrified," James replied honestly. 2,000 ships coming to kill everyone we love. Of course we are afraid." "But you are still preparing to fight." "Yes." "Why, you cannot win. The numbers are impossible." James was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, the strange human expression that still did not fully understand. "There is a concept in our history," he said. "We call it a last stand. It is when a group of warriors faces certain death and they choose to fight anyway, not because they can win, but because surrendering is worse than dying." "That is illogical," said. "Maybe, but it is who we are. We would rather die on our feet than live on our knees." James looked out the window at Earth, blue and green and beautiful. "Besides, they think they know what is coming. They think this will be like every other conquest, but they have made a mistake." "What mistake?" "They have given us time to prepare, and they have made us angry." James turned to look at her directly. "You have studied our history, yes. Then you know what we do when we are angry. You know what happens when humans decide that something needs to die." Thought about the human history files, the predators they had hunted to extinction, the diseases they had conquered, the enemies they had destroyed in their terrible wars. She felt a cold fear in her stomach, not fear of what she was about to witness. "The commander sent a message," she said quietly. "He said you have one chance to surrender, that he will show mercy if you submit now." James laughed. It was a short, hard sound. "Show him our response." He pulled up a transmission on the screen. It was Admiral, her face calm and cold. "This is Admiral of the United Earth Defense Force to the Annihilation Fleet. You have been warned. You have been given every opportunity to turn back. You chose to come here. You chose this fight." Her eyes seemed to look through the screen, directly at the enemy. "We are not your prey. We are not your slaves. We are the children of a world that has been trying to kill us for 4 billion years, and we are still here. You think you know war. You have been playing games. We have been fighting for survival since before your species existed." She leaned forward slightly. "Turn back now. This is your final warning. Because if you enter our system, if you threaten our world, we will show you what a species can do, and you will not enjoy the lesson." The transmission ended. Stared at the blank screen. "Do you think they will listen?" she asked. James shook his head. "No, they are too arrogant. They have won too many times. They cannot imagine losing." "Then what will happen?" James looked back out the window. The stars were cold and distant. Somewhere out there, 2,000 ships were coming to end everything he loved. "Then we will teach them," he said softly, "and the galaxy will never forget what they learn." 2 days later, the fleet entered the Sol system. Admiral watched them come on her displays. 2,000 ships, more firepower than humanity had ever faced. She took a deep breath and opened a channel to all human forces. "This is Admiral, the enemy has arrived. They have come to destroy our home, kill our families, and erase us from existence." Her voice was steady. "They believe we are weak. They believe we will break. They are wrong. Today we fight not just for ourselves, but for every species that has ever crushed. Today we show the galaxy that humanity will never surrender. Today we make them pay for every life they have taken." She stood up and looked around at her crew. They were afraid, they were determined, they were ready. "Let us begin." The Battle of Sol began in silence. The fleet moved through the outer system like a wave of darkness, 2,000 blocking out the distant stars. Fleet Commander Khan sat in his command throne aboard the flagship, connected to the hive mind of 1,000,000 soldiers. He could feel their confidence, their hunger, their certainty of victory. They had conquered 17 species. This would be the 18th. "The human fleet is gathering near the third planet," his tactical officer reported. "Approximately 800 vessels, primitive construction. They do not stand a chance." Khan made a sound of satisfaction. "Begin the approach. We will crush them and then burn their world." The fleet accelerated toward Earth. They never saw the first attack coming. From the asteroid belt, that ring of rocks between the fourth and fifth planets, something emerged. Not ships exactly. Smaller, darker, almost invisible against the black of space. Stealth drones. Thousands of them. Each one carried a single warhead and was piloted by a human volunteer who knew they would not survive the day. Lieutenant Wei was one of them. He was 23 years old. He had a mother on Earth, a sister on the moon colony. He would never see them again. "For Earth," he whispered, and aimed his drone at the largest ship he could find. The first wave of drones hit the fleet like invisible knives. They punched through hulls before anyone knew they were there. Explosions bloomed in the darkness. 400 ships died in the first 10 minutes. Khan screamed orders across the hive link. "Shields up, defensive formation. Where did they come from?" But the drones were already gone, either destroyed or spent. And now the human fleet was moving. Admiral watched the chaos from her command ship, the UES Defiance. She allowed herself a small smile. "Phase 1 complete. Begin Phase 2. The human fleet did not approach in elegant formations like other species. They came in scattered groups, unpredictable, using every piece of debris as cover. Their ships were ugly and brutal, covered in armor plates and weapons. And those weapons were terrifying. Fired tungsten rods at 3% of light speed. Each impact carried more energy than a nuclear bomb. Ships that had survived centuries of warfare were torn apart in seconds. Missile swarms darkened the space between fleets. Human missiles were not elegant. They were simply very, very fast and full of explosives. They did not need to be smart. They just needed to hit something. The returned fire. Their organic weapons were powerful, beams of concentrated biological energy that could melt metal and boil flesh. Human ships began to die. But they kept coming. Captain James commanded a destroyer called the Endless Night. A beam cut through his ship's midsection, killing half his crew instantly. The ship was breaking apart. Any other species would have abandoned ship. James ordered his remaining crew to aim for the nearest enemy vessel. "We are going to ram them," he announced calmly. "It has been an honor serving with you." The Endless Night crashed into a carrier at full speed. Both ships exploded. 3,000 soldiers died. This scene repeated itself across the battlefield. Human ships that could no longer fight did not retreat. They became weapons themselves, crashing into enemies, detonating their reactors, taking as many with them as possible. Khan watched his fleet being torn apart and could not understand it. These humans were insane. They valued their own lives so little that they threw them away for the chance to kill a few more enemies. "What are they?" he demanded of his advisors. "What species does this?" No one had an answer. Then the boarding parties arrived. Drop pods launched from human ships and headed straight for vessels. Each pod contained a squad of soldiers in power armor, armed with the most brutal weapons humanity had ever designed. Corporal Maria was in one of those pods. She thought of her sister, who had died on New Helsinki. She thought of the 40,000 colonists who had been killed when the finally bombed the settlement from orbit. The pod crashed through the hull of a battleship. Maria and her squad poured out into the alien corridors. They had never experienced boarding actions before. Why would they? No species was crazy enough to fight inside enemy ships, where there was no escape, no retreat, just close-quarters combat until everyone was dead. Humans, apparently, were that crazy. Maria encountered her first soldier around the first corner. It was massive, 3 meters tall, covered in armor, with claws that could cut through steel. It had killed hundreds of enemies in its lifetime. Maria shot it in the face 3 times, kicked its body aside, and kept moving. "These things are ugly," she commented over the squad radio. "Focus, Corporal," her sergeant replied. "We have a reactor to blow." Across the fleet, human boarding parties were fighting through corridors and chambers. They were outnumbered and outmatched in almost every way. They did not care. When their ammunition ran out, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their hands. When they were too wounded to stand, they crawled toward enemies and detonated grenades. A scientist aboard one of the ships managed to capture a wounded human soldier. He wanted to understand what made these creatures so dangerous. He ran every test he could think of. The results made no sense. The human's blood was full of iron. His cells were burning oxygen at an incredible rate. His body was already healing from wounds that should have been fatal. And his brain was producing chemicals that should have made him collapse from terror and pain. Instead, he was laughing. "What are you?" the scientist demanded. The human looked at him with blood-filled eyes and smiled. "We are what your nightmares are made of," he said, "and we are just getting started." Then he grabbed the scientist's arm and would not let go, holding him in place while a grenade he had hidden under his body exploded. Khan received reports from across the fleet. They were losing, not just losing, being destroyed. A species that had seemed so primitive, so weak, was tearing through his forces like a storm through dry leaves. "Launch the weapon," he ordered. "Use the..." They had brought a special weapon, a plague designed specifically to kill humans. It had been engineered from the deadliest pathogens the Dominion had ever encountered. It would spread through Earth's atmosphere and kill every human within days. The weapon was launched toward Earth in 1,000 pods. Admiral saw them coming. "Activate orbital defense grid," she ordered. "Do not let those pods reach the surface." Defense platforms around Earth opened fire. Energy beams and missiles tracked the pods and destroyed them one by one, but some got through. A few dozen reached the atmosphere. On Earth, billions of people watched the sky and waited to die. The pathogen spread quickly. It was designed to be unstoppable, to kill anything with human DNA. They had spent centuries perfecting it. 6 hours later, every human who had been exposed was still alive. How? Khan screamed. How is this possible? A human transmission reached the flagship. It was Admiral, and she was smiling. Did you think we would be unprepared for biological warfare? We have been fighting diseases since before we had fire. Our immune systems have evolved for millions of years to destroy anything that tries to kill us. She paused. Your plague was impressive. Our bodies neutralized it in 6 hours. She leaned forward. Now let me show you our response. Phase 3 began. Human ships equipped with experimental drives began performing micro-jumps. They would disappear from one location and reappear inside vessels for just a fraction of a second, long enough to deposit explosive devices, long enough to detonate them. Ships began exploding from the inside. The flagship was the primary target. Admiral had saved the Orpheus Gambit for this moment. A single ship, the UES, jumped directly into the flagship's reactor room and detonated its full payload. The explosion consumed the flagship and the 12 queens aboard. In an instant, the entire hive mind went silent. Millions of soldiers lost their connection to the Synod. They became confused, disoriented, unable to function. The remaining human forces showed no mercy. When it was over, 1,800 ships were debris floating in space. 187 had escaped, fleeing in random directions, their crews too broken to do anything but run. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked at the field of wreckage. So much death, so much destruction, so many human lives lost. But Earth survived. She opened a channel to every receiver in the galaxy. Her message was broadcast to 1,000 worlds. This is Admiral of Earth. To the survivors, run home and tell your people what happened here. To the galactic conquered, we warned you. We begged you to leave us alone. We offered peace and you gave us war. Her voice was not angry, it was tired. Remember this day, not as a victory, not as a triumph. Remember it as the consequence of ignoring a species. Remember it as what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. She paused. We did not want this, but we will finish it. The Dominion will answer for what they have done, and any species that threatens humanity again will receive the same lesson. She cut the transmission. In the silence that followed, the galaxy held its breath. Everything had changed. 5 years after the Battle of Saul, the galaxy was a different place. The Dominion no longer existed. Without their queens, the hive-minded species had collapsed into chaos. Billions of wandered their worlds without purpose, unable to think clearly, unable to organize. Some starved. Others simply stopped moving and waited to die. The species that they had enslaved for centuries rose up. With no coordinated defense, the former masters became prey. 300 years of brutality were repaid in a single decade of revenge. Some people said it was cruel, others said it was justice. The galactic conquered dissolved. The alliance that had existed for 200,000 years fell apart in fear and confusion. No one knew what to do. The rules that had governed galactic civilization suddenly seemed meaningless. Because there was a new power in the galaxy, and everyone was terrified of it. Humanity did not seek conquest. After the Battle of Saul, their fleets returned home. They buried their dead. Over 200 million people had died in the war and began rebuilding their colonies. They asked for nothing. They demanded nothing. But requests began to arrive. Species that had been bullied by for centuries sent messages to Earth. They asked for protection. They asked for help. They asked if humanity would defend them the way they had defended themselves. The United Earth Council debated for months. Some argued that humanity should stay isolated, focused on their own recovery. Others believed they had a responsibility to help those who could not help themselves. Ambassador, now the most famous human in the galaxy, made the final argument. "We did not ask for this war," she said to the council. "We did not want to become symbols of violence and destruction, but that is what we are now. Every species in the galaxy looks at us and sees death." She paused. "We have a choice. We can hide in our corner of space and let them fear us, or we can use what we have become to protect the innocent. We can show them that humanity is not just a weapon. We are also a shield." The council voted. Humanity would help those who asked. They would teach them to fight. They would defend them until they could defend themselves. 3 former slave species of them were the first to accept. Human instructors traveled to their worlds and began training their people, not to conquer, to resist, to survive. "You do not need to be strong," Maria told her alien students. She had been promoted to major and now led one of the training missions. "You do not need to be fast or powerful. You need to be determined. You need to decide that you would rather die than submit. Once you make that choice, everything else becomes possible." Her students were small, fragile creatures. They had been bred for obedience for generations. But slowly, something began to change in their eyes, a spark of anger, a hint of defiance. Maria smiled. She recognized that look. It was the first step toward freedom. The galactic conquered reformed, but under new rules. Humanity did not ask to join. They were invited, and they did not come as a junior member. They came as equals. The first session of the new Galactic Assembly was held on a space station in neutral territory. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to establish a new order. Ambassador addressed the assembly. She was older now, with gray in her hair and lines on her face. She had seen too much death, but her eyes were still sharp and her voice was still strong. 5 years ago, I stood before this assembly and asked for membership in the Galactic Concord. I offered peace and friendship. I warned you that humanity would defend itself. You did not listen." She looked around at the assembled aliens. Some would not meet her eyes. Others stared at her with naked fear. "We did not want this war. We did not seek destruction. We only wanted to be left alone, to grow and learn and take our place among the stars. You saw our kindness and called it weakness. You saw our short lives and assumed we were fragile." Her voice became harder. "You forgot that short-lived things fight harder. We have no time to waste on fear. We have no centuries to recover from loss. When we love completely. When we fight with everything we have. When we lose someone, we carry that pain forever, and we make sure the ones who hurt us pay the price." She paused and let the silence stretch. "We are the children of a world that tried to kill us every day for 4 billion years. We learned to eat poison and breathe fire. We learned to make weapons from rocks and fire. We hunted predators to extinction not because we were stronger, but because we never stopped. We chased them until they collapsed from exhaustion and fear. We are not conquerors. We are survivors. And survivors, when pushed, become something far worse." She softened her voice. "But that is not all we are. We are also artists and poets, teachers and healers. We love our children and mourn our dead. We dream of better worlds and work to build them. We are capable of terrible violence, but we prefer peace. We prefer friendship. We prefer to build rather than destroy." Stepped forward, closer to the assembly. "So here is humanity's new offer. Be our friends and we will die to protect you. We will share our knowledge, our resources, our strength. We will help you grow and defend you until you can defend yourselves." Her eyes hardened. "But be our enemies and we will make you wish for death. We will hunt you across the galaxy. We will never stop, never rest, never forgive. We will become the nightmare that you fear in the darkness between stars." She let those words hang in the air. "The choice, as it always was, is yours." The assembly was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, representatives began to stand. They placed their appendages, hands, tentacles, claws, over their hearts in the universal sign of respect. The motion to accept humanity as a founding member of the new Galactic Federation passed unanimously. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal. Cities were rebuilt. Families grieved their losses and then began to heal. Children played in parks beneath a sky dotted with orbital defense platforms, a reminder of the war that had been and the peace that had to be protected. In the archives of a young historian named completed her account of the human war. It was the first comprehensive history of humanity written by an alien, and it would become required reading for every species in the galaxy. Her conclusion read, "The humans have a saying, 'Do not mistake my kindness for weakness.' We made that mistake once. The entire galaxy made that mistake. We believed that because humans were young and small and short-lived, they would be easy prey. We could not have been more wrong. Earth does not produce conquerors, it produces survivors. For 4 billion years their world tested them with ice and fire, plague and predator, disaster and death. And for 4 billion years they refused to die. They adapted. They fought. They grew stronger. They became something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that treats death not as an enemy but as an old companion to be respected but never feared. The thought they were predators. They learned too late that they were facing the ultimate predator, a species that had hunted everything on their world to extinction and was still hungry for more. The thought they were bringing war to primitives. They discovered they were awakening a sleeping beast that had been fighting wars since before the Dominion existed. Now humanity stands among us. They offer friendship to those who want it. They offer protection to those who need it. And they offer a warning to anyone who would threaten them or those they have promised to defend. The warning is simple. We are the children of we are persistence predators. We do not stop. We do not surrender. We do not forgive. Remember this. Remember what happened remember what happens when you ignore us mercy. And never, ever make that mistake again. Far from Earth, in the deep darkness between galaxies, human exploration ships pushed forward into the unknown. They were not running from anything. They were not hiding from the galaxy they had shaken. They were simply doing what humans had always done. Looking for the next challenge, the next frontier, the next thing that would try to kill them. And somewhere in the back of each ship, in cargo holds and storage lockers, weapons waited, just in case. Because humanity had learned something in their long, bloody history. Peace was precious. Peace was worth fighting for. But peace only lasted as long as you were strong enough to defend it. And humanity would always be strong enough.